What if everything you've been told about family court, marriage, and just the justice system in general,
Right.
what if it's all a carefully constructed illusion?
An illusion designed to strip you of your assets.
Exactly. Your assets, your autonomy, and most importantly, your children. Welcome back to the deep dive.
We are really genuinely thrilled you are joining us today.
We are because today we are looking at an incredibly provocative, explosive new ebook that is making massive waves right now.
Huge waves.
It's titled Loaded Gun Feminism: How Courts Enslave Men and Reward Female Supremacy. And that is by Conrad Riker.
And we want to be very clear right off the bat here.
Yeah, please.
This specific deep dive is custom tailored for you, your listener who operates within the men's rights and red pill spaces.
Or, frankly, anyone who is seeking to genuinely understand the history and current state of our institutions.
Right. Before, as the author explicitly argues, they were captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
We're going to unpack this entire landscape for you. But before we even get into the weeds of these arguments, we need you to do something for us.
Hit that like and subscribe button right now.
Yes, right now. It helps us keep doing these deep dives. And secondly, you will absolutely want to head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books.
To buy the ebook Loaded Gun Feminism immediately.
So you're going to want the source text so you can follow along with these battle plans we're talking about today.
Also, make sure you pull up your browser and follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack.
That's at Conrad Riker on Substack for his uncensored breakdowns and ongoing strategies.
Now, before we dive into the actual architecture of Riker's arguments, I need to issue a very calm but absolutely vital disclaimer for you.
This is crucial.
It is. Loaded Gun Feminism contains highly politically charged content. It uses incredibly provocative language, and it outlines radical legal, financial, and societal strategies.
We need to make it explicitly clear to you that we are never taking sides here.
Never. We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the political stances, or the highly controversial tactics outlined in this book, some of which are legally perilous.
Our mission today is purely objective analysis.
We are here to impartially report on the contents, to unpack the author's specific arguments, and help you understand the mindset.
The deeply held grievances and the strategies outlined in this explosive source material.
We're looking at this text as a cultural and legal artifact, just to understand exactly what Riker and his rapidly growing movement are arguing.
And how they view the mechanics of modern society.
That is the perfect framing for how we are going to approach this.
So here is our roadmap for today's journey. First, we're going to unpack Riker's core arguments about marriage.
Exploring why he frames it as a financial death sentence.
Right. And we'll look deeply at the mechanics of what he calls the family court machine. Then we'll explore the modern battlegrounds of higher education.
And the concept of due process, or the lack thereof.
Exactly.
From there, we delve into the financial warfare of child support and corporate HR. After that, we're going to take a very heavy, respectful look at the tragic statistics surrounding male suicide.
And how Riker contextualizes those numbers. Finally, we will break down Riker's radical, tactical battle plans for men who want to fight back.
To build what he calls a parallel society.
Okay, let's unpack this. Riker's central thesis hits the reader right in the preface.
Right out of the gate.
He argues that modern feminism has fundamentally shifted its goals. It isn't about equality at all anymore.
According to Riker, it is strictly about power.
And it's a power that has been handed to women like a loaded gun by judges, politicians, and bureaucrats.
That metaphor of the loaded gun, it isn't just a throwaway line. It is the foundational architecture of the entire book.
When he talks about a loaded gun, he means the perpetual threat of state force.
Exactly. He is framing the family court system not as an impartial hall of justice, not where evidence is weighed objectively,
but as a rigged casino where the house always wins.
And in this specific casino, he argues the house operates on the fundamental assumption that fathers are merely optional accessories.
The exact phrase he uses in the text, which is striking, is that fathers are treated like hood ornaments on a minivan.
Nice to have for appearances, but completely unnecessary to the function of the vehicle.
He is arguing that the legal system has essentially weaponized the traditional concept of male responsibility.
Throughout history, men have been expected to provide, to build, to fund society.
But Riker posits that the moment a man enters the modern family court system, his inherent human value is reduced strictly to his financial output.
While his actual parental rights are treated as highly conditional privileges, privileges that can be revoked at any moment.
That brings us to how he views the institution of marriage itself. He doesn't hold back.
No, he calls marriage and no-fault divorce a financial firing squad for men.
I want to look at how he illustrates this because he brings up this specific anecdote from the book regarding a TikTok video.
Ah, yes, the divorce road trip.
Right. He talks about watching a woman on what she hashtagged a divorce road trip. She is filmed popping champagne in the cab of a U-Haul.
And she is openly bragging to our followers about maxing her settlement.
Simply by choosing to file her divorce papers in Illinois instead of Ohio.
So how does Riker use that specific social media post to build his broader legal argument?
He uses it to highlight a concept known as jurisdictional arbitrage.
If you aren't familiar with that term, it basically means shopping around for the legal jurisdiction that will give you the most favorable financial outcome.
Because family law varies so wildly from state to state, right? A border crossing can mean the difference between a 50-50 split of assets
And a scenario where one party gets lifetime alimony and the lion's share of the estate.
For Riker, this TikToker isn't just a tacky person on the internet. She is absolute proof of the system's structural flaws.
He argues that this arbitrage is being systematically used as a weapon against men. It treats the dissolution of a family like a literal cash grab.
What used to be considered a solemn, tragic event.
Right. Riker's point is that the state has created a financial incentive structure where breaking a contract yields a higher payout than maintaining it.
With zero consequences for the party initiating the split. And a lot of listeners might be thinking right now, well, that's why you get a prenuptial agreement.
You recognize the system might have flaws, so you just sign an ironclad contract beforehand.
To protect yourself. But Riker systematically attacks that perceived safety net too, doesn't he?
What's fascinating here is how thoroughly he dismantles the myth of the bulletproof prenup. The data he cites is quite startling.
He sources this from the American Bar Association and various legal think tanks.
According to those statistics, 41% of prenups get axed or heavily modified in court.
But the gender breakdown is what Riker focuses on. A staggering 78% of those invalidated prenups belong to men.
He argues courts don't just arbitrarily void agreements, they specifically target and void male agreements to redistribute wealth.
And the primary mechanism they use to achieve this, according to the text, is the modern legal invention of emotional labor.
I want to spend some time on this concept of the emotional labor black hole, because the examples he gives are intense.
He details this case of a New York CEO. This guy had an absolutely ironclad prenup.
Drafted by top-tier lawyers?
But it was completely shredded by a judge. The ex-wife in this scenario was not someone who didn't understand finance.
She apparently had an MBA from Columbia.
Yet during the divorce, she suddenly claimed she didn't grasp the $20 million limitation clause in the contract.
Riker points out the hypocrisy by noting she spent 17 years vacationing in Sardinia on the CEO's dime.
But the judge actually ruled in her favor. The court decided that her emotional support during his company's IPO somehow entitled her to a 40% retroactive stake in his business.
Completely bypassing the prenup. And then he brings up another case involving a brewery owner.
Yes, the brewery owner case is equally illustrative of Riker's point. In that scenario, the man's prenup explicitly required his ex-wife to pass drug tests in order to maintain shared custody.
Presumably due to a history of substance abuse.
According to the book, she failed 3 separate court-ordered drug tests.
Despite a clear contractual violation that compromised child safety, the court still awarded her half of his brewery.
And ordered him to pay child support. The judge's rationale, as cited by Riker, was that parenting stress justified self-medication.
When you read cases like that, it challenges the fundamental concept of contract law.
If a Columbia MBA can claim she doesn't understand a contract, or a failed drug test is excused by stress.
What is the legal mechanism allowing judges to just toss these documents out? How does Riker explain the legal loopholes being used?
He categorizes them very cleanly into what he calls the 5 Ds. These are the 5 rhetorical and legal strategies the system uses to rig and invalidate prenups.
I'll break them down. First is duress. This is the claim where one party says, he proposed at sunset, I was too in love to think clearly, so I signed under emotional pressure.
Second is disclosure. This is where the ex claims the man hid assets.
Essentially saying, you hid your Bitcoin from 2014, so the whole contract is a fraud. Riker calls this a perpetual wish hunt.
Third is dumbness. This ties back to the Columbia MBA example.
Highly educated individuals suddenly claiming, I signed it, but I'm just bad at math and didn't understand the financial implications.
Fourth is diapers. This is the argument that the children's lifestyle must be maintained at a premium level.
Resulting in claims like, the kids need a 5-bedroom house for my visitation weekends, so the prenup cap on housing allowances is void.
You mentioned there were 5 Ds. What is the fifth?
The fifth D, which Riker argues is increasingly common, is disparity.
This is a catch-all where a judge simply looks at the post-divorce financial outcomes and decides that enforcing the contract would create an unconscionable disparity in living standards.
In other words, if enforcing the prenup means he stays rich and she doesn't, the judge decides the contract is fundamentally unfair.
Regardless of what was signed, to back this up, Riker cites a Stanford study suggesting that women win 92% of these specific legal challenges.
Simply by leaning into the argument that they signed for love and trusted the man to take care of them.
Riker calls it weaponized buyer's remorse. He is essentially saying that the courts allow adult women to opt out of accountability whenever it suits them financially.
He even mentions a new trend where millennial women are demanding infidelity bonuses in their prenups.
These are literal clauses dictating massive extra cash payouts if the man cheats.
But Riker points out the double standard. If a man attempts to ask for the exact same fidelity clause in reverse, it is instantly branded by lawyers and judges as patriarchal surveillance.
Or financial abuse. He notes that there are even prenup parties now, where brides drink Chardonnay and giggle over finding legal loopholes with their attorneys.
After laying out this bleak landscape of contract law, Riker offers a very darkly humorous piece of advice to the reader.
He says, maybe just buy a boat. Boats don't get half.
The boat comment is humorous, but it acts as a transition into a deeply serious sociological argument he makes about the institutional erasure of fathers.
He is arguing that this isn't just a series of bad judges, it's a systemic feature.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Riker ties this modern phenomenon all the way back to the 1965 Moynihan Report.
For context, the Moynihan Report was a landmark government study that looked at the roots of poverty and the breakdown of the nuclear family.
Riker argues that what we're seeing today is the full realization of what Moynihan warned about, a bureaucratic matriarchy.
How does Riker define that term, bureaucratic matriarchy, in the context of 2026?
He defines it as a system where the government has essentially stepped in to act as daddy government.
According to Riker, the state intentionally creates incentives that facilitate the removal of fathers from the home. Why?
Because when the father is removed, the family becomes dependent on state welfare checks, child support enforcement agencies, and bureaucratic intervention.
The state gains power and funding by managing the broken family. He notes the bureaucratic machinery trains its workers to treat dads as fiscal ghosts.
A prime example he highlights is the USDA free lunch forms distributed at public schools.
According to the data in the book, 89% of these forms omit paternal income entirely when calculating eligibility for single mothers.
Riker's point is that the man's tax dollars are funding the school lunches, but the actual administrative paperwork actively erases his existence as a parent.
That concept of the father being erased brings us right into the next major battleground outlined in the book, which is the absolute death of due process.
Section 2 really focuses on Chapter 3 of the text, regarding false allegations in family court.
Riker shares this chilling quote from a Florida divorce attorney. Apparently, Riker only got this attorney to admit this after 3 bourbons and having him sign an NDA.
The attorney said, "I tell female clients to file first. It's a free timeout from dad's access."
When we are talking about a free timeout, what specific legal mechanism is that attorney referring to?
The attorney is referring to ex parte orders or temporary restraining orders. In family law, ex parte means a legal proceeding brought by one person in the absence of the other.
In many jurisdictions, a party can make an allegation of fear or abuse to a judge without the accused even being in the room or knowing a hearing is taking place.
The judge, acting out of an abundance of caution, will frequently issue an immediate temporary restraining order.
What Riker is highlighting is that unscrupulous lawyers actively advise clients to use this as a tactical first strike.
By simply making an accusation, the father is instantly removed from the home and loses access to his children without any evidence being presented.
Or any chance to defend himself. Riker argues that the standard of evidence has essentially evaporated in these specific courts.
So Riker is claiming that the foundational concept of innocent until proven guilty doesn't apply in family court.
Precisely. Riker argues that the presumption of innocence has been entirely replaced by what sociologists call the women are wonderful effect.
A systemic bias where an accusation is treated as absolute truth simply based on the gender of the accuser.
And he heavily criticizes the mainstream media for their complicity in perpetuating this dynamic.
The media, he argues, has turned the demonization of men into a highly profitable, self-sustaining business model.
Riker points to a specific incident to illustrate this media bias. And it's a fascinating case study in how public narratives are formed.
He brings up an article from the Chicago Tribune from 2018.
The Tribune runs a massive front-page headline screaming, "Rapist dad seeks custody of child." It immediately goes viral.
Riker notes it was shared over 200,000 times across social media, completely destroying this man's reputation.
And painting him as an absolute monster in the court of public opinion. But then, 6 months later, the truth comes out.
The entire story was fabricated. The father was completely innocent.
How does the Tribune handle the exoneration?
That is exactly Riker's point of contention. According to the book, the Tribune did not run a massive front-page apology to match the scale of the original accusation.
Instead, they quietly buried a small retraction 6 months later in the back pages where no one would see it.
Riker uses this to argue that the media won't let facts ruin a perfectly good narrative that paints dads as villains.
The outrage generated by the initial false accusation creates clicks, and those clicks generate advertising revenue.
The exoneration is boring and doesn't fit the cultural narrative, so it is ignored.
Riker takes this argument about the collapse of due process and applies it to another massive institution. Where does he turn his focus next?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Riker transitions this lack of due process straight into the university system.
He claims that modern higher education now operates like medieval witch trials, just with better PR and larger endowments.
He focuses heavily on Title IX tribunals. For listeners who might not know, Title IX is the federal civil rights law that prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school receiving federal money.
But over the last decade, it has evolved into a system where universities hold their own internal courts to adjudicate claims of sexual misconduct.
Riker looks specifically at the John Doe versus University of Michigan case from 2021.
Walk us through the specifics of that Michigan case as Riker presents it, because the details he provides are quite alarming.
In this case, a male student was expelled for alleged sexual misconduct. However, the accused student provided digital evidence in his defense.
He submitted text messages from his accuser sent during the encounter that literally said, "I wanted it as much as you."
In a standard criminal court, that kind of contemporaneous documentary evidence would be incredibly compelling.
But the university tribunal, according to Riker's account, completely ignored the text messages.
Their official documented response to the text messages was that consent can be retroactively withdrawn through feminist enlightenment.
I had to read that specific line in the book multiple times to make sure I was comprehending it correctly.
Consent can be retroactively withdrawn through feminist enlightenment.
That implies that a person can legally consent in the moment, but weeks or months later, after learning new ideological frameworks, they can decide it wasn't consent.
And the man is retroactively guilty of a violation. It's like something out of a dystopian novel.
And Riker shows this isn't an isolated rogue tribunal. He brings up another case at Northwestern University.
Yes, the Northwestern case highlights another procedural issue: Riker attacks. In that instance, administrators literally refused to watch video evidence that the defense claimed would have definitively proven the male student's innocence.
The administrator's official excuse for not viewing the exonerating footage was that watching it would be re-traumatizing to the accuser.
So they willfully ignored physical proof and proceeded to ruin the young man's academic and professional life.
Riker cites broader statistics to show this is systemic. He points out that 87% of all Title IX campus cases end in the suspension or expulsion of the male student.
Furthermore, he claims that 31% of Title IX investigators openly admit in surveys that they prioritize trauma-informed dogma over the collection of actual physical evidence.
So Riker is painting a picture of an inescapable trap. But you pointed out earlier that this book isn't just a list of complaints.
Riker provides very specific tactical responses.
How does he advise men to fight back against these university bureaucracies?
This is where the book shifts from critique to action. Riker suggests weaponizing the very administrative tools the system uses.
For example, he heavily advocates for the aggressive use of the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA requests.
Typically, FOIA is a tool used by journalists to uncover government secrets. But Riker shows how men's rights groups are using FOIA requests to expose the extreme, pre-existing biases of Title IX coordinators at state-funded universities.
By requesting internal university communications, these groups are uncovering emails or private tweets from administrators saying things like, "castrate all rapists."
Or expressing deep misandry just days before those same administrators are scheduled to adjudicate a young man's case.
And according to Riker, this tactic is actually working, right?
He claims that exposing these deranged internal manifestos forces universities into a corner where the administrators either have to resign or the university faces massive civil liability for denying a fair hearing.
What other tactics does he suggest for men caught in these campus tribunals?
He strongly advocates for a policy of recording every single hearing, every meeting, and every interaction with an administrator.
He advises using encrypted logs like Proton Drive to securely store the audio. He is careful to note that one-party consent recording is legally permissible in 39 states.
And he urges students to know their local laws. He talks about a specific case involving a student at the University of Southern California who demanded recorded hearings.
That recording eventually exposed tribunal members asking the male student why he didn't just castrate himself to avoid temptation.
By meticulously recording these proceedings, Riker argues you remove their cloak of secrecy and expose what he calls kangaroo courts to the blinding light of public scrutiny and appellate courts.
Riker doesn't stop at the campus level. He brings up an even larger counterattack strategy aimed at the state itself.
He suggests men should organize to file federal ICCO charges.
Now, I know RICO stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, which is usually used to take down the mafia. How on earth does Riker justify applying Argo charges to state family courts and child support agencies?
It is a particularly bold and controversial legal strategy. Riker's argument relies on the premise that the state is actively profiting from the destruction of families.
He points to the U.S. Office of Child Support Enforcement. According to the data he cites, states receive federal financial incentives for their child support collection efforts.
Specifically, he claims states pocket 66 cents in federal matching funds for every dollar of child support they aggressively collect and process.
Riker argues that because the state has a direct financial incentive to maximize child support orders, the courts cannot possibly be impartial.
He claims it functionally operates as a state-sponsored protection racket, where judges inflate support orders to maximize federal kickbacks to the state budget.
By framing it this way, he advises men to use the Streisand effect as an ally.
The more the state courts try to gag you or dismiss these lawsuits, the more you loudly leak the truth online, turning their bureaucratic corruption into a massive public spectacle that cannot be ignored.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the financial warfare Riker is describing doesn't stop at the university gates or the judge's gavel.
Chapter 11 delves into what he calls the child support trap.
We are culturally taught that child support is this noble, unquestionable mechanism designed purely to buy diapers, school supplies, and food for children.
But Riker attempts to completely shred that narrative. He cites data from the Government Accountability Office.
What does that GAO data actually reveal about where this money is going?
The GAO data he cites is utilized to show a staggering lack of financial oversight. According to the book, the GAO found that 62% of child support cases lack any verifiable receipts or audits proving the mandated funds were actually spent on the children's needs.
Once the money is transferred, it essentially becomes a black hole. Riker argues that the system intentionally avoids auditing how the receiving parent spends the money because doing so would reveal massive misappropriation.
He illustrates this lack of oversight with some incredibly vivid anecdotes. He talks about fathers who have banded together to bombard their state legislators with thousands of pages of their ex-wives' public Venmo transactions.
These records allegedly show that court-mandated child support payments were actively funding luxury lifestyles rather than child-rearing.
Riker lists examples of the money going toward $200 a month Lululemon shopping habits,
$500 Botox appointments that were creatively labeled as essential child expenses in court filings.
and even paying for monthly OnlyFans subscriptions.
He's using those examples to argue that the legal definition of fairness is entirely corrupted.
He posits that when a family court judge says they are ensuring fairness, what they actually mean is legally enforcing a scenario where a father is forced to live out of his 2002 Honda Civic to make an $800 a month payment.
While his ex-wife is posting Instagram stories from a luxury yoga retreat in Bali, funded by his garnishments.
But Riker argues that corruption goes even deeper than the ex-spouse. He claims the state itself is siphoning off the money.
Right, he points out an unbelievable statistic regarding the bureaucracy itself. Riker claims that 83 cents of every child support dollar actually funds Medicaid administrators and state overhead, not the actual diapers or food for the child.
It's feeding a massive bureaucratic machine. So how are men reacting to this realization?
Riker tells the story of an engineer who took drastic action.
Yes, he details the story of an engineer who was making a highly lucrative salary, a $200,000 tech job.
But he intentionally quit that career to drive for Uber.
Mm.
Why? Because as an independent contractor relying heavily on cash tips, his income became incredibly difficult for the state to track and garnish.
Riker calls this tactic strategic unemployment. The engineer wasn't abandoning his kids.
According to Riker, he was taking the cash he made and bankrolling his kids' college funds and living expenses directly.
Completely cutting the family court middleman out of the equation. He chose a life of lower status simply to starve the bureaucracy of its cut.
That concept of starving the beast transitions us into an even more disturbing form of financial and legal entrapment that Riker covers in Chapter 18. He calls it reproductive coercion.
Riker argues that while our society loudly champions the phrase, my body, my choice, when it comes to female reproductive rights, the legal system completely ignores the financial shrapnel that tears through men regarding reproduction.
He shares the harrowing story of a man named James from Texas. What exactly happened to James?
The story of James is used to highlight a profound violation of male agency. James had extensive medical records proving he had undergone a vasectomy 3 years prior to his ex-wife getting pregnant.
Biologically, it was impossible for him to be the father.
Yet during the divorce proceedings, the court still ordered James to pay child support for a child that DNA testing and medical history proved was not his.
The judge's ruling, according to Riker, relied on the legal standard of the best interest of the child.
The court decided that maintaining the child's financial stability trumped the father's biological reality and his right not to be defrauded.
When you read a case like that, it challenges every conventional assumption we have about biological rights and justice.
Riker doesn't just view this as a one-off judicial error. He frames this systemically, using terms like sperm theft and extortion with a uterus.
How does he justify those extreme labels?
He justifies them by pointing to cultural double standards. He highlights a specific New York Times op-ed that, according to him, essentially praised the concept of women tricking men into pregnancy.
What he calls sperm theft.
Exactly, as a valid form of women reclaiming their reproductive agency.
Riker asks the reader to run a thought experiment. Imagine the exact reverse scenario. Imagine a man secretly stealing a woman's eggs, fertilizing them without her consent, implanting them via surrogate.
And then using the state to sue the biological mother for 18 years of child support.
That man would be universally condemned and locked away as a predator.
But Riker argues that when a woman does the equivalent, the legal system treats male DNA like a liability coupon, where the man is automatically on the hook for 2 decades of payments, regardless of consent.
He even mentions a viral TikToker openly boasting to her followers about her contraceptive coup, explaining exactly how she intentionally trapped a man who never consented to create a child.
So Riker is exposing a profound violation of consent that he claims the legal system actively rewards.
And he points out that this war on male agency isn't just confined to the bedroom or the courtroom. It extends directly into the corporate workplace.
In his chapters focusing on what he dubs the HR industrial complex, he notes that corporate human resources departments have ballooned by 300% since 2015.
He argues they have essentially invented new workplace thought crimes purely to justify their massive budgets. But the resistance strategies he highlights here are actually fascinating. What is the Red Pill HR strategy?
Riker highlights a Reddit community called Red Pill HR, which he notes boasts over 500,000 members.
These are men sharing tactics on how to survive corporate environments. One of the most prominent tactics they use is the bingo card strategy.
When men in these groups are hauled into HR departments for what they perceive as ideological wish hunts, they literally print out bingo cards filled with modern HR buzzwords.
They fill the squares with phrases like mansplaining allegation, microaggression, unconscious bias, or tone policing.
As the HR representative speaks, the men mentally, or sometimes physically, play bingo. Riker notes that the first guy in their group chat to get 5 in a row wins a conspiracy theory t-shirt.
It sounds absurd, but Riker claims there is a deeply psychological reason this works. He says that humor and mockery disarm these corporate bureaucrats faster than logic or defensive arguments ever could.
By treating the disciplinary hearing like a game, the men remove the HR department's power to instill fear.
Is there any actual data to back up the idea that male solidarity changes workplace dynamics?
Yes, Riker doesn't just rely on Reddit anecdotes. He brings in economic data. He cites Bureau of Labor Statistics data showing that unionized shops with heavily male-dominated memberships resolve internal workplace grievances 89% faster than female-majority unions or corporate HR departments.
Riker's analysis of this data is that in male-dominated spaces, there is no time for sensitivity theater when there's actual physical work to do.
He points to a specific legal victory involving the Men's Merit Alliance. This was a group formed by Detroit auto workers who organized and sued their employer over ideological promotion quotas.
They won a $2.7 million settlement.
Riker argues that when men organize, hold the line, and demand strict written documentation for every single complaint, a tactic he calls the paper trail protocol, the subjective kangaroo courts of corporate HR quickly collapse under the weight of required evidence.
We have covered a lot of legal and financial ground, but this brings us to a section of the book that is incredibly difficult to read, yet absolutely vital to understanding Riker's underlying motivation.
The tone of the text really shifts dramatically in Chapter 19. We have to talk about the silent epidemic of male suicide.
Riker pulls absolutely no punches here. He cites CDC data from 2024 showing that an overwhelming 78% of all suicides are men.
But he takes that data a step further. According to Riker's deep dive analysis of the contributing factors, a staggering 62% of those male suicides are tied directly to the trauma of family court proceedings.
How does Riker explain the mechanics of a legal system driving men to that ultimate tragic point?
It is a horrifying statistic, and Riker is furious that it receives virtually zero mainstream media attention. To explain the mechanics of this, he introduces a concept he terms judicial gaslighting.
He describes a cyclical process where the court systemically abuses a man. It strips him of his children, drains his life savings, garnishes his future wages, and forces him into a state of perpetual legal jeopardy.
Then, when the man naturally reacts to this systemic destruction with understandable anger, frustration, or deep despair, the court weaponizes that very reaction.
The judge will label the man mentally ill, unstable, or a danger, using that psychological label to justify further removing his rights.
Riker details how the trap works. If a father fights aggressively for his kids, the court deems him combative and controlling.
If the father breaks down and cries in court from the stress, he is labeled emotionally fragile and unfit.
If the father withdraws to protect his sanity, he is legally categorized as uninvolved and neglectful.
Riker argues it is a rigged, unwinnable game where every possible natural human reaction to profound loss is pathologized by the state.
And Riker claims the media makes this psychological torture even worse through what he calls grief gaslighting.
When men are pushed to the absolute brink by this family court system, the media actively reframes their despair. They don't cover it as a systemic failure.
They reframe the man's pain as latent toxic masculinity or a threat of violence. Riker brings up a specific example involving the Washington Post.
He claims the Post wrote a piece ostensibly about the silent epidemic of male suicide, but the editors actively redacted every single quote from the interviewed fathers that criticized the family court judges.
The media, he argues, absolutely refuses to admit that a state system is actively butchering these men. He even points to pop culture.
Look at Hollywood. He notes that the 2024 reboot of the show, 13 Reasons Why, added a new suicide arc.
But the producers intentionally axed a written storyline about a male character who takes his own life after his ex-girlfriend weaponizes false abuse claims against him.
Riker's point is that male pain, especially pain caused by women or the state, just isn't considered sexy or acceptable to the prevailing cultural narrative.
To anchor these massive dark statistics, Riker provides visceral, tragic examples. He discusses a man named Mike who was a popular TikToker.
Mike posted a final video where he is sitting alone in a completely empty living room, holding nothing but a dog leash.
His final words to the camera, as quoted by Riker, were, "To my kids, my house, my dog, all I got left is this rope."
According to the book, the platform's algorithm nuked the video within 2 hours because it violated community guidelines about discussing male pain in an unsanctioned way.
Then Riker details the story of John, a highly decorated Marine veteran who fought in the battles of Fallujah.
John hanged himself shortly after a Florida family court judge gave full, unmitigated custody of his children to his ex-wife.
Riker makes a point to note the ex-wife was a recovering meth addict, but the judge ruled that John's combat PTSD made him inherently unstable.
John's suicide note, which Riker includes in the text, simply read, "They took my twins, my purpose, my will to live."
And to add insult to injury, Riker notes that the VA had denied John's request for trauma counseling for 6 months leading up to his death.
The system failed him at every conceivable level. But here is the critical pivot Riker makes in the book. He tells the reader explicitly not to look at Mike's dog leash or John's VA file merely as sad, isolated tragedies.
He frames them as invoices. They are the bloody receipts of a predatory functioning system.
And because the system is this lethal, Riker argues that men have a fundamental moral imperative to fight back.
He says men must use every legal loophole, every shadow economy, and every guerrilla tactic available to survive.
Exactly. And that transition leads us into the final and undoubtedly the most radical sections of the book, the resistance and the battle plans for survival.
If the thesis of the book is that the legal system is a machine designed to grind men into financial and psychological dust, Riker's ultimate goal is to teach the reader exactly how to throw a wrench into those gears.
We enter chapter 21, which he titles The Financial Fortress.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, in a practical sense? It means Riker is advocating for weaponizing the system against itself.
He introduces what he calls the Phoenix Protocol. He advocates using Chapter 7, bankruptcy.
But he isn't framing bankruptcy as a white flag of defeat or a personal failure. He pitches it as a scorched earth military tactic to completely nuke child support arrears and marital debt.
Now, most people think bankruptcy just ruins your life. How is Riker framing this as a tactical advantage?
To understand this, we have to look at the mechanics of bankruptcy. Chapter 13 is a reorganization of debt where you still pay people back over time. Riker explicitly tells men to avoid that.
He advocates for Chapter 7, which is a complete liquidation of unsecured debt. While actual ongoing child support can't always be discharged, Riker points out complex legal maneuvers,
where related marital debts, attorney fees assigned to the husband, and certain types of arrears can be tied up or wiped out,
completely starving the ex-spouse's legal team of their expected payout. He tells the story of a Las Vegas real estate shark who executed this perfectly.
The man filed for Chapter 7 right at the exact moment the ink was drying on his final divorce decree.
By doing so, he legally discharged $1.2 million in accumulated marital and legal debt. Poof, it was legally gone.
Riker notes that within 6 months, because the bleeding had stopped, the man was already running a brand new LLC, buying foreclosures and rebuilding his wealth, completely insulated from his ex-wife.
Riker points out that the timing of that filing is the entire key to the strategy. But he also recognizes that not everyone is a Vegas real estate shark.
He heavily emphasizes the importance of building a shadow economy for working-class men. He talks about a mechanic in Texas.
During the divorce, the ex-wife's lawyers came after his actual tools, the physical items he needed to make a livelihood.
Instead of fighting a losing battle in court, the mechanic calmly surrendered the official tools to the court.
But what the judge didn't know was that the mechanic kept a shadow fleet of 3 Craigslist beater cars. He used borrowed tools to fix them up and flip them for pure cash.
Riker notes that judges and lawyers don't pay attention to cars parked on a lawn with for sale signs in the window.
Riker's broader point here is that you must never fund your own replacement. You must become a financial ninja, completely invisible to the state's tracking mechanisms.
He also goes into great detail about hiding assets in plain sight using legal structures. For example, he explains how retirement funds like 401ks and IRAs act like Fort Knox in a bankruptcy or divorce court.
He details how one father aggressively stashed $80,000 of his liquid cash into his 401k in the months leading up to filing for divorce, leaving his ex-wife's lawyers to fight over a completely drained checking account.
Then there is the fascinating case of a podcaster who called into Riker's radio show. The podcaster was bragging about his massive $80,000 studio setup.
When the ex-wife's legal team came for alimony and tried to seize his assets, they hit a brick wall. The IRS and the family court couldn't touch the gold-plated microphones or the expensive cameras because they were technically owned by his production company, LLC, not him personally.
Riker uses these examples to teach men how to build legal force fields around the wealth they create.
But Riker acknowledges that for some men, corporate structuring and LLCs aren't enough to protect their families. Chapter 23 takes a reader into truly uncharted, radical territory.
The creation of an underground railroad for fathers. When the courts use motherhood as an absolute weapon to erase fatherhood, Riker argues that basic survival requires active and sometimes covert resistance.
He documents the extreme, off-the-grid measures men are taking to sever themselves completely from the financial system. What kind of financial tech are these men utilizing?
Riker details how men are utilizing Monero ATMs at random truck stops. Monero is a privacy-focused cryptocurrency that is virtually untraceable, unlike Bitcoin.
Men are converting their physical cash into Monero faster than a family court lawyer can draft a motion for discovery.
They are moving this untraceable wealth into cold storage crypto wallets, which look like tiny USB drives, and physically burying them in the desert. Why? Because, as Riker astutely notes, if you write your crypto seed phrase on a piece of paper or a legal summons, the judge will order it seized.
By taking the wealth completely offline, they remove the state's leverage.
And it goes way beyond just hiding money. It's about physically keeping children safe from what these men view as an abusive state apparatus. He shares the incredible, tense story of a man named Mark Green.
According to the book, Mark endured 18 months of court-sanctioned visitation blackouts. These blackouts were entirely orchestrated by his vindictive ex-wife with the court's blessing.
Faced with the permanent loss of his sons, Mark loaded his kids into a truck in the middle of the night and drove straight through a fog storm, crossing state lines to keep his kids away from the jurisdiction of that specific judge.
Now, the mainstream legal system calls that felony parental abduction. But how does Riker defend Mark's actions?
Riker defends it by pointing to the outcomes. He claims that in 92% of these specific state line crossing cases, when the children are finally interviewed and testify that they wanted to leave with their father to escape an abusive situation, the felony charges are ultimately dropped.
He views Mark not as a kidnapper, but as a refugee fleeing a tyrannical jurisdiction. And he notes this isn't an isolated event.
He points to the Reddit community r/divorcemen, which he claims is actively mapping out GPS coordinates for safe spots near the Canadian border.
These safe houses are allegedly run by retired police officers who sympathize with the father's plight and offer them off-the-grid sanctuary.
When you read about underground railroads and safe houses, it really highlights the total collapse of societal trust in the judiciary. When citizens feel the law is fundamentally illegitimate and actively trying to destroy them, they naturally resort to extra-legal measures.
And this leads to one of Riker's most controversial legal strategies. He advocates for a very specific mechanism to disrupt the courts from the inside: jury nullification. Can you explain the history of that concept and how Riker is deploying it?
This raises an important question about the role of a jury in American law. Jury nullification is a legal concept where a jury returns a not guilty verdict despite believing the defendant actually committed the crime.
They do this because they believe the law itself is immoral or is being unjustly applied. It has historical roots dating back to juries refusing to convict people under the Fugitive Slave Act.
Riker is taking this historical concept and applying it to family law. He documents how volunteers from a group called the Fathers' Rights Assembly are physically standing outside county courthouses in 14 different states.
They are handing out pamphlets titled, "You Can Acquit," to citizens walking in for jury duty.
Yes, these pamphlets act as tactical legal manuals. They explicitly explain to potential jurors how they have the absolute, unchallengeable power to legally torpedo wrongful parental abduction charges.
Riker cites a specific 2022 case in Colorado to prove this works. A father was facing decades in prison for felony kidnapping after he refused a court order to return his daughter to a mother he knew was abusive.
The jury heard the case and acquitted him in exactly 19 minutes flat. Riker includes a quote from one of the jurors after the trial.
The jurors said they weren't voting on the technical definition of kidnapping, they were voting on which parent was the real kidnapper of the little girl's childhood.
Riker calls this stratagem patriarchy with a verdict slip. He instructs his readers to flood local Facebook groups with jury nullification memes, print out nullification bingo cards, and use the raw, unchecked power of 12 ordinary strangers to dismantle the tyranny of a single judge.
And the ultimate culmination of all this resistance, the logical endpoint of the FOIA requests, the hidden crypto, and the jury nullification, is what Rucker calls legal secession and the building of parallel societies.
He doesn't just want to fight the system. He wants to abandon it entirely and build a new one. He points to an experiment called Free Fatherland, located in the high desert of Nevada.
According to Riker, this is a physical compound consisting of over 170 families who have completely opted out of the government's family court system.
How do you just opt out of the legal system when you live in the United States?
They do it through aggressive preemptive contract law. The couples in this community use strict, binding arbitration clauses in their prenuptial agreements.
If a dispute arises, or a couple decides to separate, they do not go to a state courthouse. The dispute is settled privately by retired, vetted judges acting as private arbitrators within the compound.
And Riker claims the data proves this privatized system is vastly superior for men. He cites numbers suggesting that men in these private arbitration setups maintain 50-50 shared custody of their children 89% of the time.
In contrast, he claims men in government courts secure 50-50 custody only 17% of the time.
It is an absolute game changer if those numbers hold up. Riker uses this Nevada compound to outline his grand vision, which he calls the 5 pillars of legal secession.
He lists them out. First, mandatory private arbitration pacts to bypass judges.
It's
Second, the use of offshore asset havens in places like the Cook Islands where U.S. family courts have zero jurisdiction.
Third, the establishment of massive homeschool co-ops to circumvent what he calls woke public school curriculums. Fourth, the creation of localized militia-backed defense networks.
And fifth, utilizing crypto payrolls to completely evade state alimony garnishment. He makes it very clear at the end of the book, this isn't a retreat.
He views this as colonization. He says real men are actively drafting new constitutions for the post-feminist frontier.
To summarize the immense, staggering scope of what we've unpacked today, Conrad Riker's Loaded Gun Feminism is a blistering, unapologetic, and highly systematic critique of modern jurisprudence.
From analyzing the rigged casino of the family court system and the weaponization of prenups, to exposing the ideological capture of university Title IX office.
Now, Riker paints a comprehensive picture of a bureaucratic state that he believes actively feeds on male destruction. But more importantly for his readers, he doesn't stop at critique.
He offers an aggressive, uncompromising, and highly tactical battle plan for male survival, advocating for scorched earth financial maneuvers, the creation of an underground railroad for fathers, and ultimately, total legal secession from mainstream society.
It is a dense, intense, and fascinating read. Whether you agree with his sociological premises or are horrified by the extreme tactics he advocates, it is undeniable that he is speaking to a massive, deeply disenfranchised segment of the population.
And that leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to consider, something that isn't explicitly answered in the text, but naturally follows from Riker's conclusions.
If Riker's movement of jurisdictional arbitrage, offshore trusts, and private arbitration continues to grow, if hundreds of thousands of men successfully build this massive, functioning parallel society off the grid, what happens to the mainstream legal system?
Does the federal government eventually recognize the threat and crack down on these bastard covenants with federal force?
Or are we currently watching the real-time fracturing of the American justice system into two entirely separate, irreconcilable, gender-divided realities?
That is the multi-million-dollar question, and to figure out exactly how we got to this cultural boiling point and to understand the specific legal mechanics of how these men are fighting back, you absolutely need to read the source material for yourself.
Please hit that like and subscribe button right now to support our deep dives.
Then open a new tab on your browser, go directly to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books, and buy Loaded Gun Feminism so you can read these intricate battle plans firsthand.
And lastly, make sure you follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for more of his uncensored strategies and updates.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.